Now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next keynote speaker, Rhys Williams. So Rhys is a high-achieving young gun and is driven by a passion to build strong and meaningful communities. And I'm stealing Jeff Hutchinson's words from Who Are You, which was recorded in May 2017. When Rhys was elected to the Mandurah Council at the age of 21, a former councillor said to him, "Don't worry, there's a kids menu, you'll be right." It's an attitude he's often encountered, and interestingly enough, when we were talking about inclusion yesterday, there's some resonance there. It's an attitude he's often encountered, but learned to ignore as he pursues his passion to build strong, meaningful communities and promote innovation. Rhys was the 2015 Young Australian of the Year. He's now running for the Mayor of Mandurah in the local government elections, so I'm sure those centres that are in the city of Mandurah might want to go and have a chat to him. And he's the CEO of The Makers, a non-profit he founded. Make Place is a footloose and fancy-free and unfunded, I understand, social enterprise with a big agenda for making things happen. Rhys will be talking about social enterprise, a path to sustainability, and this is obviously more critical now than ever when we're having to look at our funding and making our money go further. So I'd like you to put your hands together and welcome Rhys Williams.
Well, thank you so much for that. And can I just begin by, as the previous speakers, just acknowledging that we're standing here this evening this morning on the land of the Noongar people, and pay my respects to elders past and present, and also the contribution that our Aboriginal people make to community. Can I acknowledge the honourable member, Darren West, and ladies and gentlemen, congratulations for being here. I just want to begin before we kind of get into this conversation around social enterprise by saying thank you dearly for what you do. One of the things that we have to acknowledge more of in these discussions about budgets and about where we're heading for the future is that it can't be denied our community's most important asset. Our community's most important asset is its people. And the work that you do in strengthening your communities throughout Australia, throughout Western Australia, and with all of the kind of worries that we have around the future of regions and the future of budgets, the work that you do is just so significant. And so I really think, you know, in light of what you're facing now in terms of this review and in terms of the work that you're doing, make sure, you've got a fight on your hands, but make sure that your voice is heard loud and clear. The time for saying it's not about self-promotion, we can't get up and talk about the wonderful things that we're doing has to stop. The first thing that you have to do when you walk out of this room today is stand up loud and proud and say, we make a difference in our community. The work that we do is important, and we require the resources to be able to continue to do that. Because if we don't, then the problems that we're going to face in our communities are only going to grow. Make sure that you make that loud and clear, because you're incredible and the work that you do needs to be valued. I think you need to give yourselves a big round of applause. Okay, this idea about social enterprise, is it a game changer? Is it going to solve all of our problems? No, of course it isn't. Is it a trendy buzzword? I suspect not. But can I say, regardless of how you're feeling about social enterprise, regardless of how you're feeling about your organisations, the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that, you know, we're in tough times, we're in interesting times. We know that as an adult cohort living in the Western world right now, we are the most addicted, the most medicated, the most in debt, and the most stressed out adult cohort in the history of humankind. And so we know that we've got some things that we need to tackle, some challenges that we face. We know that we've got significant challenges like climate change. Just last year, I was in a room full of 1,000 young leaders from across the world, and I was standing next to this young woman from a Pacific Island nation. And she said to me, do you know, you talk in the West about climate change in a hypothetical nature. You're still debating whether it's real or not. When there's a storm surge in my country, our living rooms are underwater. We know that, you know, there's a growing sense of anxiety and depression in our community. 1 in 4 people under the age of 25 are going to face a mental health issue. 1 in 3 women in Australia are going to face anxiety or depression in their lifetime. We know that we've got some challenges to tackle, and that the best place to be able to tackle those problems are in our communities. As we've already heard this morning, we also know through you know, a whole range of different circumstances, and we shouldn't pin the blame on any one government or any one group of people. We know that these are tough economic times globally. These are tough economic times. I was reading some stuff about the foreign aid budget, Australia's foreign aid budget this morning. We've had a cut of 2/3 to that foreign aid budget in just 5 years. $2 billion has come out of Australia's foreign aid budget. The United Nations target for foreign aid, 0.7% of our gross national income. The Australian bipartisan target, 0.5% of our gross national income. That's not huge numbers. Our current budget, 0.2% of our gross national income. You have to ask, are we negating our responsibilities as a wealthy, prosperous nation? And yet one of the things that we know is these are tough economic times. We know that the cuts that are taking place are in the spirit of repairing our budget so that we don't leave the burdens to the future generations. And I commend the current state government for working towards that. I just think we need to be careful about the way that we go about that. And so we need to acknowledge that whilst we've got this suite of challenges that we face, we also, on the other hand, have a situation where there's not going to be a lot of money around in the ways that it has been in the past for us to be able to tackle these problems. And so like always in community, we need a new way. We need to find a new solution. And so we come up with this term, social enterprise. It was probably designed by some millennial hipster rocking around thinking, geez, that's a cool term. But the truth is social enterprises have been around for a really, really long time. Our first example that I could find of a social enterprise was the Wolverhampton Society for the Blind. This was a shop set up in Wolverhampton where they provided products and services to assist people who were blind, and the income that they generated from that service went back into their charity to be able to support people in need. Then fast forward 40 years, in 1941, the Red Cross opened up in Britain. They opened up their first op shop. And what was really interesting is throughout World War II, they had 200 stores, another 150 pop-up shops, another thing that we thought that we designed in this era. 150 pop-up shops, and they were making a difference to the lives of people during that tough time. Oxfam, or at the time the Oxford Committee for Famine Relief, come along. 7 years later, they set up the first gift shop. And we know that this has been something that sustained Oxfam's business right throughout history. And so here we are, we're looking at a time where there were tough times, people were vulnerable and going through difficulty, and yet there wasn't a lot of money to be able to go into doing business as usual in supporting community vulnerabilities and foreign aid. And so the community sector did what it always does. It found a way, and it designed the first kind of showings of a social enterprise. And so what is this idea of a social enterprise? How does it work, and what does it actually mean? Well, I define it by doing good and doing well at the same time. This is about looking at no longer a transformative approach. It's no longer business as usual. Let's do this differently. It's about solving a problem and generating revenue streams that give us the chance to be sustainable in solving those problems. One of the things that we know is that we're not going to be able to do this with everything, but we should try, because the indicators are there. We know that there's going to be less money around. We know that we need to look at new models. And this isn't just because there's less money around. More productivity, more efficiencies in our businesses means that we can do a better job of what we're trying to provide for our community. So doing good and doing well at the same time. Our charity model is always based on goodwill. It's usually based on, I'm not telling you any secrets, it's usually based on low wages. It's usually based on, you know, having to do 50% of your time paid and 50% of your time volunteering. But the social enterprise model, whilst that goodwill exists, is about doing good by doing well. And so that's one of the things that we really need to think about. Some key examples. This is one of my favorites, the Thank You organization. This is a group of people that got together because they wanted to eradicate global poverty in this lifetime. And so they come up with the idea initially of getting a share of the $600 million plastic water bottle sector. They develop up a plastic water bottle and they're selling it out and donating 100% of their profits to supporting eradicating global poverty. Fast forward 8 years, and they've now got 50 products that they sell in 5,500 retail stores across Australia, and they've generated $6 million for charitable organisations, an amazing organisation. And they keep it really simple. We have a simple formula: make great products and give 100% of profits to people in need. This is another great organisation. Who gives a crap? Okay, 40% of the world's population don't have access to toilets. That's about 2 billion people don't have access to toilets. And so these two guys, they want to do something about that. And so they come up with the idea of generating an eco-friendly toilet paper. And 50% of the profits generated from the sales go towards charities building toilets right across the world. They've donated $1.1 million to building toilets across the world. They've saved 70 million litres of water and saved 30,000 trees through their eco approach. Well, they've got a good eco-friendly product. They are supporting an important issue of building toilets across the world, and they're generating a profit at the same time. It's the win-win-win that we're kind of looking for. And they're pretty clever. Good for your bum, great for the world. This has become a trendy thing that people want to be part of. It taps into that intuitive thing that we all have inside us about making a difference. What a bonus. I can go to the loo and also contribute to making the world stronger at the same time. Isn't that a bonus? And of course, the Bendigo Bank, which many of you would be so familiar with because in a lot of ways it's the lifebloods of your community, started 20 years ago this year. There's 300 stores across the world, local decision making, the people in the communities making decisions about distributing the profits to local projects. $165 million has gone back into communities through dividends from banking. They're a competitive organisation. They're an organisation that provides good customer service and at the same time is changing the face of communities right across Australia. This is the core example, the best example, I think, in Australia of a social enterprise. It doesn't matter if they're profit, non-profit. They're doing amazing things, and if you're not banking with them, you should be. This is I think one of the things that I think about in terms of social enterprise, and especially with those sort of examples, is we can get overwhelmed by the significance of those projects. And we're not all going to be designing global social enterprises that are going to be tackling global initiatives. And so closer to home, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about an organisation that I set up in Mandurah called The Makers. Now, I set this organisation up as a 17-year-old, and the goal was we wanted to be able to support finding new ways of being able to tackle community challenges. That's not always easy, and that's pretty hard to define, but we as a group of people had this common goal around wanting to make a difference. And so we started off with this health promotion project. It had already been in Mandurah for a few years, and we expanded it right across Western Australia and into the Northern Territory, called YoFest, giving high school students at the time, and now primary and high school students, the chance to be able to look at sharing their stories about their health issues with their communities, being able to say, this is what we're feeling and thinking about these issues. Started off as a little project, now 5,500 participants involved each year. As I said, it's run across WA and the Northern Territory. And you know what? It's not a social enterprise. Portion of the funds that we generate are through fees and ticket sales and that side of it. A portion is through funding. It's not always about, in your organisations, looking at finding that silver bullet, that thing that's going to make you that profit. It's about finding your purpose and looking at what you want to do, and then finding new and innovative ways to be able to develop revenue streams through that. From there, we looked at developing up, our next goal was really looking at how do we instill this idea of citizenship in young leaders. Because if we're serious in regional communities around this state of ensuring that they are strong and prosperous into the community, we have to make sure that there's key contributors coming up through the ranks that understand the importance of not only following your dreams and aspirations, but also doing good for your community at the same time. And so 40 young leaders a year join us on a 6-day leadership camp. At the end of the camp, we give them a $5,000 community grant, and we say to them, you can run a project, whatever you like, as long as it's tackling a community project, a community challenge, you can get out there and do it. And so, this has been going for 10 years now, seeing incredible results, and they're running projects that themselves are little social enterprises, developing income streams so that they can support their own future development. This is an idea of young people driving their own future. We have very little to do with the ins and outs of whatever this community project is, but we're empowering this community asset, these young people, to be able to make a difference for themselves. So some of the projects that they've been involved in recently, they've held this Multicultural Street Festival. We have a great multicultural community in Mandurah, and we want to celebrate it. And so they get together with a group of community leaders, and they put on this street party. 5,500 people turn out in June on a wet day to stand around fire pits, eat multicultural food, celebrate multicultural entertainment, and they've driven this entirely themselves. And so I guess the point of the story is sometimes we get a bit caught up on what this thing called social enterprise looks like in the detail, and we forget why we're doing it in the first place. And that comes back to purpose. So our first real venture into social enterprise was Makeplace. The idea of Makeplace was it was a community hub to drive aspiration. In a community like Mandurah, second highest unemployment rate in the country, we know that the key way that we've got to be able to tackle our future community and economic challenges is by empowering that sense of aspiration in people and giving them the chance to have self-belief and believe that they can follow their dreams. And so the idea of Makeplace was to give them a hub that they could connect up in. People of all ages come through, they do some co-working, business development, learning about leadership, learning about contribution. The whole thing develops its own revenue streams, and I'm really proud to say that just a few years after opening, that project is now covering its own costs entirely. We've got some government contributions, but that's about the extra capacity building programs on top. We can open the doors and run this place without a dollar of funding. And that was our goal, and I'm sort of really proud that we've been able to achieve that. So thanks very much. So a few key tips, I think, in terms of what does this look like and how do we get it off the ground? Well, for me, it begins with this. You have to know your why. You've got to really understand in your hearts and your minds why you're doing this. One of the things, I got a phone call from someone about 3 months ago from a community organisation in one of our regions who said to me, I want to talk to you about social enterprise. Yes, that's great. You know, what would you like to talk about? Well, I think we need one. Okay, why is that? Well, everyone seems to have one these days. You can't just go out and say we're going to find a way to generate a profit through doing anything as a means of being able to make our organisation stronger. The successful social enterprises across the world all have one thing in common, and that is they're driven by a core purpose, by a core value that organisation holds itself to be true. And one of the really important reasons why we have to know our why before we begin is because the nature of business is that we'll pivot and change. When we first set up Makeplace, we thought that we were going to have a bunch of under 25-year-old tech heads in there designing apps. What it ended up being is a group of 25 to 45-year-old women whose kids have gone to work and they're looking at getting engaged into the workforce. So they want to start their own businesses and create new opportunities for themselves. We had to pivot. But if we didn't go into that project really understanding what our why was, then that pivot could have led us anywhere. We know, because we know our values and we understand what we're there to do, that when it comes to pivoting for our Makeplace project, you know, we're never going to become a bar. It's never going to become a pub, because our values, that's not why we went into this. And so when we're pivoting our business model, we can ensure that we're staying true to why we set it up in the first place. Really understand your why. Understand the problem that you're trying to solve. This isn't about, the problem that you're trying to solve isn't that you don't have enough money. The problem that you're trying to solve is in line with why your organisation exists. And you design a product or a service that contributes to tackling that why, whilst at the same time creating a new revenue stream for yourself. You really got to know what your why is. For us, that was easy. We knew that it was about creating aspiration in our community, whether that be through young people, whether that be through the seniors in our community, whatever mechanism, we knew that it was about growing aspiration. And so for us, as we're looking at, you know, we're adapting and changing to the market and finding new opportunities all the time, to increase those revenue streams, we can always come back to why we exist in the first place. The second tip is really gain insight. Once you really understand what that why is, you need to have a key understanding of what it is that the people who you're trying to serve need. The first question that we always should ask ourselves before we jump into anything in the community sector, but especially in developing a social enterprise, is there a need for it? Or is this just an idea that I think sounds all right? Really gain that insight. One of the best examples that I can think of in insight is, and I just acknowledge Peter Kenyon, the current West Australian Senior of the Year and CEO of Bank of Ideas, a community hero who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. I was lucky enough to join him in the United Arab Emirates a couple of years ago to develop up a strategy for engaging primarily young people into culture and into understanding what their heritage is all about as a means for combating some of the vulnerabilities that are going on in that country. And I remember so distinctly, we were sitting in this little town called Silla on the border of Saudi Arabia. And we were sitting with this group of women at a family centre who were talking about the challenges that they face. And they said to us, we need a library. We said, what do you need? They said, we need a library. Now, prior to getting into Silla, we had travelled around to all the other parts of this regional area. And many of them had libraries. And you know what? The libraries had almost no visitation. People weren't using these libraries. And so when we probed the question a little, why do you need a library? They said, because everyone's got one and we don't have one here, and we need one. Now, there were some cultural issues because, sitting in the room, we had a couple of women on our team, a couple of men on our team, and then a room full of women. So the men got up and left. And that, I think, for the organisers was a little bit confronting. Ooh, leave the women together. What could happen? And so we did that. We got up and we walked away. And what we found is that after our team stayed there for 2 hours, what they began to understand is they didn't need a library. That was just how they communicated what they thought that they needed. When we stayed and we gained true insight through the eyes of these people, what we realized is that they needed a hub where they could go to, where they could strengthen the opportunities for their children, where they could go to and where they could build strength in their networks, interact with each other. And we know, the strength of women in our community has a direct correlation with the strength of our future. So what I'm trying to say is if we had have left after the first 15 minutes, then they would have got a library. But because we stayed to gain true insight into what they were saying, to really not say, what do you need, but how can we help? What are the challenges that you face? We stayed and we had the conversations. By the end of it, we had a whole different level of understanding about what their needs are. In your communities, when you're looking at developing these sorts of projects for yourselves, please don't jump into it based on just this great idea that you've got. Truly understand why you're doing it, and then truly and deeply understand what it is that the people that you're there to serve really need from you. Build your tribe. You have to leave the ego out of the room. We can't do these things on our own. We've never been able to. We're never going to be able to. Build your tribe by getting together with the people in your community who are best placed to be able to drive these sorts of initiatives and work collaboratively. I understand that that's hard because, let's be honest, there's always a whole lot of local politics. Someone doesn't like such and such over there because, 3 years ago, their dog was, attacking their young child or whatever. Especially regional communities, they're so complex with, politics and all of those things. But the only way to be able to really and truly develop a solution that's going to be sustainable, that's going to be embraced by the community, and that's going to tackle that social problem is to build that tribe. And so I really suggest that you get together with those people in your community who you feel can help to achieve your goal and work alongside them to make it. Ditch the roadmap. I remember when we were, and this is a tricky one because we're always asked in our funding submissions, and this is one of the best things about social enterprise, I think, no master. Do it my way. Don't have to worry about, what the department are going to say in terms of my reporting processes. Ditch the roadmap. I remember so vividly when we were signing up for MakePlace, when we were getting MakePlace underway. We had this really interesting situation where the business model relied on us subleasing some of the space to tenants so that we could underwrite the cost of the lease. But we couldn't sublease anything until we had a lease. And so we had this really interesting dichotomy where we thought, well, we don't have anything we don't have a lease to be able to offer these people. And so we had to sign a tenancy agreement before we had any subtenants in place. There's $100,000 a year. We knew that we had some idea of who our subtenants were going to be, but we had to kind of jump in and take a risk. And if I had have had conversations with, the people that do it the normal way, everyone would have said to me, that's just too risky for you as an organization. Stay away from that. So sometimes it is about taking risk, and sometimes it is about recognizing that it isn't always going to be done the way that you kind of have done it in the past. One of the things about, I think, not having a roadmap is being agile, being able to pivot and change. This is a pop-up shop that, that pop-up shop that was invented in 1941. This is a pop-up shop that a group of artists came to Make Place and said to us, we want to run this tiny shop on wheels where we're going to develop up little carts and we're going to sell our materials that we make out of it. And we didn't design Make Place to be a shop, but it really hit us in every way. It helped us to achieve our goal of building aspiration because we were supporting a vibrant arts community to be able to learn how to create and produce their own products. It gave us a revenue stream because we were renting the space out. And it created community atmosphere, which is what we were all about. And so you know what, we jumped in and we said, yeah, sure, let's do it. If we had had the roadmap with the perfect business plan that didn't allow us to be able to have any freedom or flexibility, then maybe we would have had to turn this opportunity down. This is now one of the most successful things that happens out of our space. Once a month, hundreds of people come down to buy these awesome products, have a coffee, always a sausage sizzle or some food. And it was all because we were prepared to be agile and enable these community leaders who had this great idea to be able to make it happen. And I've already touched on this, be courageous. Don't be afraid to do it differently. Rewrite the book. Jump out there and just give it a crack. Our mantra all the way along was, what's the worst that can happen? This is what it looks like. This is what Make Place looks like 3 weeks before we opened. We'd had all sorts of things go wrong because, you know, that's the nature of construction. But we got there in the end. And I think that that's the beauty of being able to take that courageous step. Let's just jump in and get it done. Remember, doing good and doing well at the same time. You're running a business. Understand your financials intimately. Be constantly looking for opportunities to pivot and change. Be attracting those good, strong partners in, just like we would if we were running a business. I believe in the power of social enterprise because it frees you up to be able to do what you know is going to be best for your community. So often when we're tied to contracts or we're tied to funding or whatnot, we have to deliver it in a way that somebody else thinks is best for our community. The benefit of being footloose and fancy free is I'm going to do it my way, on my terms, and we're going to make a difference because we know how to do it. We are living in incredibly exciting times. The world is more connected than it ever has been. There are more people interacting with each other through technology than there ever has been before. Our regional communities are full of passion and full of drive and full of commitment to be able to making it better. But we need to recognize that the future of those communities and the strength of those communities in the future will be dependent on our capacity to be able to do things differently. The measure of intelligence is the ability to change. Let's take the advice of Albert Einstein and really embrace that. Don't be afraid of change. Don't be afraid to do it differently. You've had the advice this morning that, you know, because of our collective responsibility to be able to ensure that the economy is strong in this community, in this state going forward, we've all got to kind of do our bit. You're already doing so much, and so it's a tough ask, I know. But it isn't about just working harder. It's about working smarter. It's about doing it differently. It's been an absolute pleasure to be here with you this morning. Thanks very much. And I think we've got a few minutes, so if there are any questions or anything that anyone would like to add to the conversation, it'd be fantastic to be able to hear from you. Is there any? We've got 10 minutes, so probably the chance for 3 questions. Yeah. Maybe if you could just stand and shout out your question with a big loud voice. So our Make Place project is really our social enterprise, and I guess, like I said, that was really about, why Make Place exists is about building aspiration. What is it though? It's a co-working space. We've got tenants in there who are all providing mentoring and support to people that are getting started in either business or community projects. We've got room hire and opportunities for people to come and access the space, which we charge a fee for. So, it's not rocket science in terms of those revenue streams, but we created a context where we could underwrite our aspiration, our purpose, through developing those revenue streams ourselves. This is, I guess, why I wanted to give you the Makers example is some of those other ones, they require like huge manufacturing investment or, entirely new business models. But for some of you, you might already have the assets in your organizations. and you just need to rethink how you use them to be able to generate revenue streams. The thing that I think is important to note about the makers, and the reason that I shared with you those 2 youth projects to start with, is we as an organisation don't generate all of our own revenue. We take funding from Healthway and from local governments and from corporates and all of those things. But we made a commitment that we wanted that Make Place project to be entirely self-funded, which would allow us to be able to leverage off of that to be able to do other things. So don't get caught up in the definitions of social enterprise. Just look at what you're doing and then try and find ways to leverage your current assets as a way of generating revenue, or creating products and services that are within your ability to do that you can generate a return on. I think that's really important. Thanks for the question. Yep. Yep.
From those of us that live in the wheat belt?
So we'll take anyone, but primarily it's about the Peel region. But what we're keen to do is, if anyone in other regions of the state, and we've done a couple in the Kimberley and a couple in the Pilbara, if anyone in the state wants to do stuff like that, we can just give you what we've got, and you can just copy it. That's what this is meant to be all about. Yep, a question over here. We're going to bring you a microphone, and you should introduce yourself and tell us who you are and where you're from.
Hi, me. My name's Una. I'm from Northcliffe, Western Australia.
Cool.
And we have a family and community centre.
Awesome.
And I wanted some of your advice on how to engage with your local government, since you seem to be doing that well.
Yeah, I'm not sure that they'd agree with you right now. The really interesting thing about the local government community organisation relationship, if I could just, if you're from Mandurah, please don't tell them that I said this. There's this idea that, that councils in some of our regional towns own the community, and you as stakeholders in community are either a customer or a pest, or sometimes both, right? And so the key transition, the key cultural transition that has to happen in our local governments, and I know that this in itself is probably quite aspirational, but it has to be about shifting that perception so that what the local governments understand is that their role is to make it easier for people like you to be able to solve great community problems. Why wouldn't we? Now, our journey with our council was an interesting one. We went to them with this concept of Make Place, we want to do this and we want to do that. What do you want to do? Don't understand. Is it a business incubator? No. Is it a youth centre? No, but it's a little bit of that and a little bit of that, and we've mashed it all together. And no, we don't understand. We played a little bit of politics. We went and we got the councillors on board, a majority of them, and we managed to squeeze a measly 20 grand out of them. And, that was all right for a year. And then they came to us, because after a year, we could show that it really worked. And I guess this is the bit about saying, be courageous. We said, well, if you're not going to help us, we're just going to get on and do it anyway. And then they came back to us after a year and gave us $130,000 a year for 3 years to be able to run an enterprise program out of Make Place. They came to us because we showed them for a year that we were doing it, and they wanted to ride on the coattails of the success of the project. The main thing, if you're in local government, that we really have to understand is that we are not about servicing any longer. Local government does not work to service community. It is about facilitating outcomes and making it easier for the people in the community to be able to reach results. So I think that's a great question. Thank you for that. Other questions? Yep. We've still got 10 minutes, so we're doing all right.
Hi, Nick Young from Kringle Neighbourhood Centre in Paraburdoo.
Welcome.
Thank you.
How long did it take you to get here this week?
Well, I went via Brisbane, so a long time.
Right.
Frequent flyer points are looking good. My question.
Can I just tell you before you say, yes. I read this I read this article that said that if you're in Brisbane at the moment, you're never further than 10 metres away from a rat. Did you know that?
I didn't.
Right.
I'll pass that on to Mum.
Bet you're glad you're in Perth now.
My question was around gaining true insight and what's your process? How do you go from taking that symptomatic understanding of a problem? I know that in neighbourhood centres we probably have the loud squeaky wheels, so how do you actually find out what's going on there?
Yeah, I think that's a great question with a really simple answer. Have a conversation and stay. Please don't send them out a survey monkey with 33 questions asking them what they think about what you think. Just go there and stay and have the conversation, and don't leave until you feel like you could truly look at the world through their eyes. I think that's the only way to do it. And if you do that in a room full of 200 people, or you do that in a room full of 2 people, it's kind of okay. I didn't want to talk about the politics of it, but my Mayor campaign that we're running, we bought this old 1970s caravan, and we've been going around to parks and communities and front verges all around Mandurah with a goal of 1,000 cups of tea with community people, just to talk about what matters to people. And one of the truly insightful things that I've learnt through that process is people just want to be listened to. People just want to be listened to. They just want to be able to tell you how they're feeling and the struggles that they're going through and what's going on with them. They don't want you to talk to them about what you think is important to them. They just want you to listen. And there's huge insight to be gained by creating a mechanism for a conversation and then just sitting and listening. So I think that would be my advice to you. Any other questions? Cool. All right, we'll bring you the mic.
Can you just say a little bit more about the mechanism for conversation?
Well, I think it really depends on the context. So the first thing I would say is I don't think size matters. I think have a conversation with 3 people. Because often you can gain a lot of insight from talking with 3 people. Choose the people that aren't, one of the things we know, and we're all probably maybe within that bubble, is often in regional towns, or in fact Perth in general, there's 30 people that of the volunteers on every board and every kind of organisation. Go and talk to different people. Go and meet with the people on the street. Go and just have a barbecue. I know Peter often talks about, I think it's Roburn, where they have every Sunday a community barbecue. And for 2 years, nobody turned up. But after 2 years of building trust and helping to establish that sense of community, now it's like a key kind of forum for community conversations. So I think the key thing about conversations, to answer your question, is it's actually not meant to be easy, because just like building any relationship, it's based on building trust. It's based on finding that shared understanding. And I think people are kind of consultationed to death. So the benefit of the conversation is it isn't about, as I said, what do you think about what we think?
Hi, Kate Rocky. I'm the chair of Linkwest and also
on a great conference.
Run Perth Media. One of the things at this organisation is we're always trying to improve and do things better, and we want to improve engagement with Indigenous people and build more connections in that space. But also we recognise that there's not very many young men in the room, and we want to improve our engagement with young
the honourable member. It would be nice. The honourable members here.
And welcome them into our member centres in a better way in future. Can you give us some tips in that space, please?
Well, I don't know. That's a question that could easily become unstuck for me, because often I get asked to speak at Rotary clubs. Well, I used to get asked to speak at Rotary clubs. They don't ask me anymore because I always give the same answer. In the context of Rotary, not the context of this organisation. Any Rotarians in the room? Right. Okay. Apologies. In the context of Rotary, often they'll say, how do we get, this generation, they're the most apathetic generation ever. No, but they never volunteer. They don't come along to anything. We have this, Rotary's been going for 100 years and we've always had members, and now no one wants to sign up. And so, right. So if you were a 25-year-old, male, female, would you want to go along to a dinner with a group of 70-year-olds who don't necessarily understand the ability to be able to build that intergenerational relationship? Those relationships are two-way. You can't ask young people to be good at intergenerational relationships if the people on the other side of that intergenerational gap aren't prepared to work at that too. And that's hard. It's hard to do, but it's always been hard to do. But we kind of have to move beyond that. And the way that you do that, I think, is by 1, gaining insight, really understanding, and 2, finding common ground. We've all got the hilarious thing about the intergenerational question is, we've all got parents or grandparents or aunties and uncles or children or grandchildren or neighbours or whatever. We all understand in our personal lives how to build relationships with people from different generations and different cultures, in fact. And yet when we move into the professional world or in the community world, we kind of batten down and go, well, this is the way we've always done it. And so I think it's about being prepared to not change everything, but gain insight into where different people are coming from. That was the watered down answer to that question. Is there any other questions? We've run out of time. Thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you, Rhys. I thought there for a while that I might be having to tap dance up here, but thank you for taking those questions. And certainly I worked out you were the disruptive kid in the class sitting at the front of the room, and we welcome your disruption to our learning and to our thinking, and it's been fantastic. And big round of applause once again for Rhys.